I'm DiCaro from 670 The Score. Full disclosure, Gordon has a lot more inside info than I do because I get my inside info from people like Gordon. So just how many of you guys here are bloggers or write for blogs? A couple? Okay. So listening to Gordon talk about how he got into the industry is sort of the traditional story that I always heard coming out of school, that you've got to get in with like a high school paper and cover high school sports, and then you sort of move on up. So I went to journalism school at Indiana University, and I wanted to be a sports writer from the time. This is something I think gets lost quite a bit, that there are also little girls with tubs of baseball cards under their bed to this day who love baseball. And so I love seeing women here, I love having Emily here, because I think that a lot of times women sort of get pushed to the side when it comes to thinking about who the fans are, right? So when I was growing up, there were no women covering sports to the degree there are now. I mean, there was Leslie Visser doing college basketball, and once in a while I'd see Mary Carrillo doing tennis, but nothing like it is now. So I went to law school, wanted to be a sports reporter, and I went to journalism school. Came out, and I didn't want to go to the Bloomington Herald Times and cover, and this is even a super competitive job, covering high school basketball in Indiana. Just not my thing, and I wanted to do baseball. I wanted to talk about baseball. So I went to law school, basically because I didn't know what else to do. And I was a public defender, and I represented domestic abuse victims, and I did all kinds of different things for 15 years. But when blogs started sort of coming up, I got involved over at Bleed Cubby Blue, which a lot of you probably know, and then left there in one of those things that always seems to happen with blogs, where it just blows up and everyone hates each other and people leave. So that was really dramatic. And I started my own site in like 2005, 2006. And it was sort of the heyday of blogging. I think there were 4 or 5 Cubs blogs out there. We were always out fighting with each other all the time. And I would go to work and I would log on and pretty much spend my whole day fighting with people online about the Cubs. So eventually the Tribune called me and asked if they could pick up my blog and run it on the Tribune. And at that time I would do really unprofessional things like take the bullpen and like Photoshop pigs' heads onto them and call them pig pen, and all kinds of stuff that Creighton Kenny still hates me for to this day. In fact, I think I wrote in like 2000, so you were talking about writing about the owners a couple of years ago. I wrote about Creighton Kenny in like 2006, and he still hates me, like to this day.
You're a good company.
Yeah, I know. So it's funny because I think that even now, I got in through blogging, the Tribune picked up my blog, and then from there I wound up leaving law to go teach social media for the Tribune. And eventually I got put in charge of the Chicago Now blog network, and then one day I got this call saying we're going to start a sports radio station at WGN and we want you to be part of it. And that was how I got into radio and how I got into the industry. So this traditional path I think that a lot of people take, there's more options now. The industry is a mess, as all of us know right now, and people are pivoting to video, and people are losing their jobs left and right, which is really, really disheartening to see. But I go around and I speak to a lot of colleges, and I always tell the students there's way more options for you to get your foot in the door now than there used to be. So if you want to be in radio, start a podcast. If you want to be a writer, start a blog. And just try to cultivate an audience and work your way up that way, and that's sort of how I got there. I basically just kind of fell into my lap and I backdoored it, but it's funny how you sort of find your way back to what you really want to do, even if you don't take a traditional path to get there. So I always say to the bloggers out there, keep doing what you're doing, try to move up, try to get yourself into bigger blogs. I remember they used to have this conference called Blogs with Balls. They still have it. But when I used to go there, back when I was blogging, it was Jonah Carey, Bomani Jones, basically everyone at Barstool. Like, we were all just bloggers that were just trying to get our foot in the door. And now these are some of the biggest names in sports. So there's definitely more pathways in if that's what you want to do. One of the things that I sort of regret about sports radio, and I guess TV to a lesser degree at this point, is how women are so often pushed into the roles of being update anchors, sideline reporters, stuff like that, and it's frustrating because you never see a lot of situations where women are giving their opinions. Even if they're the host of a sports radio show, they're sort of soliciting opinions from the 5 men sitting around them, and the women's just kind of, oh, what do you think, what do you think, what do you think? And there's no real reporting or analysis or anything done by women. I like doing updates. I actually think it's sort of a creative writing exercise to me, in the same way that Twitter is, in that you've got 20 minutes in between updates to do a completely new update with new sound and new stats, and to make it sound different than the other one. And you've got to be right, because if you are wrong on anything, you will immediately get 50 people tweeting at you or on the text line telling you you suck and you shouldn't be in the business, and oh my God, how can you even have a job? Which I kind of think is probably how I felt too when I was not in the industry I wanted to be in, because I think your tendency is to sort of sit there and be like, I could do that. I could do that better than that person. So to that extent, I understand it. But from a SABR standpoint, one of the things I think that a lot of us struggle with is what stats, how far can we go down the advanced stats road without losing the audience? So obviously, on-base percentage is acceptable now. Everyone knows on-base percentage. Most people know OPS. WAR is becoming more acceptable, but you know, when we talk about some of the newer stats that 538's developed and stuff like that, you can immediately see people's eyes glaze over when you're talking to them. So that's sort of a challenge, and one of the things I love that like Casper does is sort of trying to introduce fans to new stats during the show and explain them so that people have some idea what you're talking about. So that's an issue, and you know, we've started having a lot of guys from 538 on the station, which I think is really interesting, but still at the same point, you know, you can tell, you can see the calls just sort of drop off, the text lines slow down. As soon as you start talking about statistics, people just sort of are like, oh, it's math, I can't deal with this. So that's sort of a challenge, especially, I mean, I'm not as versed in sabermetrics as a lot of you guys are, I'm sure, but it's something that I sort of gained interest in after I read Moneyball and sort of dabble as I can and try to include those in things. But you know, when you're hosting and you're talking about that stuff, you can literally see people just be like, I don't know what you're talking about, it's math, it's numbers, So that's sort of one of the challenges that we have involving statistics in radio. That's pretty much what I wanted to tell you guys about today. If there's anything you want me to talk about, I'm happy to answer.
Well, how can that be when you've got gambling, which I think deals with numbers pretty good, or money, which I tend to use numbers, and fantasy, where all these, I'm always amazed to listen to the radio and you hear how, oh, this guy sucks, I had him on my fantasy team and he's no good. Yeah, but we play games with real people,
yeah.
And that's so law, and I rarely hear a reaction on, you know, hey, who cares about fantasy? This is about real life. Oh, this guy sucks.
Well, I think there's a couple things. I mean, the people who really get into super fantasy stats, I think are kind of few and far between. That's a pretty selective audience. I think a lot more people pick, like, you know, oh, here's the next 5 guys ESPN says I should pick. I'll just pick one of them and look like I'm, you know, going outside the box. And with gambling, I mean, easy. You go to a site like Bovada, it basically tells you where the good bet is, right? So when you're looking at numbers that aren't, it's not as, that's what I'm looking for. It's not as instantaneous with baseball. You know, your payoff isn't instantaneous. You can't turn on the TV and watch your fantasy guy score 3 touchdowns. You can't bet on the fight that night and have the numbers come, you know, bear out. Sort of, unless you're playing, you know, hardcore fantasy baseball. You're probably not delving into advanced metrics that much, and people still pretty much stick with ERA and maybe WHIP if they're a little more educated, and otherwise they basically, you know, look at batting average still. You know, so.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the 538. I guess there's an article out there today talking about how Albert Pujols is the worst player in baseball.
Yeah, this weekend.
Yeah.
He's been on a tear since that article came out. Because it came out like Wednesday, and he's just been on a tear.
21 homers, 87 RBIs, and the guy sucks. So.
And the pushback is incredible.
But
So
he's saying, he's the worst player.
when I'm hosting, I'm always telling people, you know, statistics are just measuring and categorizing what you can observe with your eyes. And you still get the text line, you know, full of, baseball's not played on a spreadsheet, jerk, you know, and baseball's played on the field. But, you know, I always explain, you know, when people always talk about Moneyball as the rise of OVP, and I'm like, you know, Moneyball is the rise of finding undervalued statistics and categorizing them in such a way that you can tell what you need and what you want from players. And people don't seem to understand that. So I think a huge part of it is just the pushback against math. And you know, baseball is so romantic to so many people who wants to get math involved with it. And I mean, to this day, I can't calculate stuff by myself. I refuse to learn how to do it. I'd rather go to Baseball Reference and look it up. But one of the challenges too is, you know, with a site like Baseball Reference that has so much information, when you're doing updates and you've got 20 minutes in between updates to try to figure out, Baseball Reference sometimes is really overwhelming to look at and try to go through and dig out and mine some good statistics. So there's some sites out there that do a really good job of game previews where they say like, oh, you know, Anthony Rizzo's WAR is blah, blah, blah in the past 2 months. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'll just put that in an update. So, you know, it's a challenge to try to use that stuff and try to balance out turning off the audience and educating them at the same time.
But I think there's still a place for traditional statistics. I know batting averages is not popular, but for teaching a 5th or 6th grader how to apply math,
Absolutely.
batting average is great.
Well, my little guy here, I know there was a big to-do at his school because they were using fantasy football at one point to teach about statistics. And all the parents started screaming about gambling. But I mean, this generation is much more versed in statistics than I ever was at age. And even now probably, just because they've played Madden since they were little, they've played fantasy football since they were young. And so they're much more comfortable with statistics, I think, than the generations before them were.
My thing is, I think the White Sox team struggles to get fans in at the end of the year, the beginning of the year. They should have a science day, where it's a day game in April. You get a ton of grammar schools to come out there. Let's talk about the physics of swinging or batting average or whatever. Like, just to get kids out there interested in the game.
Well, there's a guy who's a baseball physicist.
They did. Well, that's actually what gave me the idea.
Yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about? There's a guy whose job is like baseball physicist.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had him on the show, and I wish I could remember his name, but like that's crazy.
Yeah, Nathan.
You know,
Yeah.
When I was in college, I took a meteorology class, and I remember going up because I wanted to know, you know, like we talk about elevation's effect on the flight of a ball and the heat and humidity. So talking about the humidity with the guy, I said, well, shouldn't a ball travel better if it's less humid? He said, no, it's the opposite, because if the ball's lighter in relation to the air. Well, that was a light bulb went on.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be the kind of stuff that would be really cool for, you know, like science day or something.
Yeah, and so I was in Indiana, and I took statistics for non-majors, which is basically, I can't remember, it wasn't rocks for jocks, like we called geology, but they had a name like that, like stats for, I don't know what. But our teacher was like, I'm going to teach you, our professor was like, everything was in relation to basketball. He taught everything in relation to basketball. So it was really, and it was the thing that kept us interested. And also, which is probably why it was for non-majors. But it was, that was something that kept my attention, and that is a way of teaching math that is interesting to this generation. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I think the team should be capitalizing on that.
My wife would have been here, but her father's ill. Just so like.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Well, not that he's ill. I'm glad that she
the StatCast, she loves that. I mean, like, she keeps scoring games. She doesn't have a big personality, so when she gets in she'll tell me at work when folks are talking baseball, she knows the answers to everything. She won't go forward and do it. She won't commit, because she'll say, "Oh, this guy said the wrong thing," and all that. But the one thing I found is when StatCast came out, she loves StatCast. You know, it's like, what was the launch angle? I just looked at it, what? So how fast did it come? The whole 9 yards. So some of that to me, you know, it interested her, which kind of made now I'm watching it a little bit more.
I think there's a lot of us that are sort of information junkies. I mean, that's why Twitter is so addictive to me, because it's constantly new information. You know, I'm just like, tell me something new, tell me something I don't know. And so StatCast, I think, feeds that for a lot of us that just kind of want to read new information all the time and find new stats and find new ways to talk about baseball. I deal with the issue all the time where guys come up to my husband and start talking baseball with him, and he just like points to me. And, but yeah, and it does. There's always, I think, especially ways that people can understand. So you can understand a launch angle, you can understand exit velocity, even things like that. And so that is very useful information. I think sometimes some of it goes really, really deep into things that you maybe necessarily aren't that interested in. And that's sort of, like I said, the balance of using statistics on the radio is finding the stuff that really gives people information that isn't going to turn them off and that's easy for them to understand. I think 538, it's ELO, they call it, that measures the power and how well any team is playing at any given time. That's one I really like, because it's sort of like a power ranking. Yeah, it's LO.
Our part LO, chess.
Yeah.
These are the chess ratings, actually, amazingly enough, that were adapted to
Oh,
baseball.
interesting.
Yeah.
And then we
For
have
a while, college football BCS was using yellow.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and it gives people information that I don't think they necessarily can get other places. You know, how good are the Dodgers compared to how good the Cubs were last year? Yeah, and that was and how good are they compared to the 27 Yankees? And I mean, that was a really interesting article they had about that stuff. We did almost an hour on that on the air because people just kept calling in and wanting to talk about it. And so when you can bring stuff to people in a way that they're comfortable with and that they understand, then I think that's when you sort of bring in the next generation of people who are interested in metrics.
So if the statistics engage people in debate,
Yeah, pretty much. Well, that's all sports radio is trying to find something. You know, whenever the phone lines get low or like people aren't really texting, we've got like 2 hours left to go, you just throw out something super controversial and just watch the phone lines like go crazy for Gordon does it better than anybody.
That's fun.
Have you done a show on some of the StatCast stuff or a segment on that?
We talk about it when we're talking about statistics, so when we're arguing about who should play or that kind of stuff, but we haven't delved into it.
Because we talk about this in the press box sometimes, especially those of us that been around for longer than the others. Like the exit velocity.
Yeah.
To me, it's a nothing stat. Because
You need a context.
before I knew what the actual numbers were, I thought some of those hard hit balls were going way harder than that.
Yeah.
So when I see 100 versus 105 versus 91, I'm thinking, so it's all the same. And I mean, really, and so, but then here's where I think I like Wade Boggs or Rod Carew or something. Were they not great hitters because maybe their average exit velocity was pretty low compared to other guys? They knew how to hit. Those guys knew how to hit. And you see Rizzo do it with 2 strikes or with a guy on third or a guy in scoring position with 2 outs. He'll just flare up.
Yeah.
No exit velocity there, but that's a great piece of hitting.
Yeah. I sort of compare it to how far did it fly. Remember that old, do they still do that in the BGN? How far did it fly? It's that kind of thing. It's just like when someone smashes one, it's just like, oh, what was the exit velocity? I feel like all of a sudden launch angle and exit velocity was everywhere, and there was no like build up. They just kind of came out of nowhere and there they were.
They did.
Ryan did one the
Because
other
that was
night.
never measured.
There was a weird stat, this Dino Saris on Fangraphs wrote it, where if you hit the ball 5 inches out in front of the plate, you're more likely to hit a home run. But as the ball gets closer to the plate, you actually lose exit velocity. So if you are like a singles hitter, you want to wait till the ball comes farther in because you're going to get more exit velocity than you would because you're just not as strong. But if you want to hit home runs, you have to do it farther out at a place where you have lower exit velocity.
And higher strikeout totals.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what it is because you
Sure.
have less time for the ball to barrel out. But it was like kind of like what the reverse of what you would think. You would think you want to lower your exit velocity to then get your higher launch angle.
Actually, I think that kind of goes in line with it because hit homers, you got to kind of open up your hips. So
Exactly.
You got to get out in front of the ball a little bit faster. So to me, that kind of just makes sense. I think StatCast romanticizes statistics. And that, because you said, baseball is romantic to some people, it's mystical. I know it is to me, I'm sure it is to some people here. But, to see, you can say, man, I saw Giancarlo Stanton hit this 500-foot homer, but when they say it exited at 128 point, compared to the average, you're like, see, that's awesome, and then it just, you say that's a great ball player, like a great home run hitter, so I mean that it's, to categorize it's different, right? Because Carew, Wade Boggs, Tony Gwynn, guys like that, I mean nobody expected them to do that kind of stuff. They expected them to produce at times, which they did. Their RBI totals were always pretty good. I remember Claude Carew at 100 RBIs when they were like 14 homers or whatever. So, of course, there's always the Tommy Herr one. But, I just think that when you talk about sluggers, you want to see that. It's a romantic thing. I want to see, boy, how hard did he hit it? How high did he hit it?
I want to see,
Who
like
hit the farthest?
The Glen Ellen Hill.
the measure to me is, did he break the scoreboard? and once in a while you see that. That's cool. I'll write about that. I'm not mentioning exit velocity and all unless it's like something like we've never seen.
That's it.
Right.
Yeah, I'm a White Sox fan, but I love watching YouTube videos of Dave Keenan's homer in the 70s. And clearly Kenmore. I mean, there's something mystifying about that.
Exactly.
It's like how can you
Glen Ellen
hit
Hill.
the ball that far?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of Eno Saris, I think it does a great job with statistics that are interesting to people. He wrote the one on Chris Hayes, right? If Chris Hayes could get a hit. So you guys know the MSNBC anchor, Chris Hayes. He asked the question on Twitter, he's like, something I always wonder about, if I played an entire season in MLB, would I get a hit? And Chris is kind of a little guy, and doesn't look like a slugger or anything like that. So Eno Saris actually did a piece on, like, what would an average person like Chris Hayes, would he get a hit? And all these, Brandon McCarthy was weighing in, and a bunch of other people weighed in on it, and it was pretty interesting and funny, and that's a great way to use statistics to get people interested in it.
And what was the conclusion?
Yes, that he would get a hit.
Sure, if you can make contact over 6 months, you'll get a hit.
Yeah, but they had diagrams showing, bat speed of an average person versus an MLB player, and it was
Yeah.
completely.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it was off the charts. But it was funny and it was interesting, and Chris thought it was great, and so that's the kind of stuff I think that gets people more interested in statistics. Yeah.
But the weird thing about statistics, now we're in this, the 100-mile-an-hour era, and the Greg Maddoxes, the Kyle, Hendricks, guys like, oh, but they're useless. But the kid up in Milwaukee, Davies, who's leading the league in wins, and you don't want this kid. He's too small. Don't even give him a shot in the minors.
Yeah.
Where we've left kids like that behind who love the game of baseball versus, hey, here's this big strong guy. Boy, he can't control anything, but boy, he throws hard. And we've changed the game in the last 20 years. You go back to the expansion era, what's that, 93, where it was home runs galore. Pitchers didn't throw that fast back then. Now, hey, we're getting a lot of home runs because we've got all these exit velocities.
This is my issue with FIP. Does anybody here like FIP?
It bothers me too. I understand.
It bugs the hell out of me because it's so heavily prejudiced toward power pitching and strikeouts. I mean, Kyle Hendricks does strike out a lot of guys, for the kind of pitcher he is, but that's not what he's about. And guys are intentionally not striking out guys sometimes and are very, very effective pitchers for a career. And FIP hates them.
Well, and pitch counts are so crazy because now you watch TV of whatever MLB game, seems like every announcer for every team, kid's up to 67 pitches through 4 innings. Oh, he's about ready to be done. And then got to the magic 100, get rid of him. Okay.
Yeah, and then that brings in the whole medical analysis side.
Yeah.
Nobody knows for sure on any of that stuff either.
Exactly.
Ask Jack Morris what he thinks of that.
Or Warren Spahn and Juan Marichal.
Did FIP come about though? Because remember the original DIP statistics from McCracken? It kind of yielded that left-handed junk pitchers and knuckleballers had lower batting and slugging average of balls in play, and everyone said, there's something wrong with that statistic. Let's come up with new ones.
Well, FIP started out, FIP was a fantasy tool. It started out by a guy who wanted to get an edge in his fantasy league, and what it was designed for, it worked for. He used it to identify pitchers who, with that tool, he could identify, these are guys whose performance, his ERA is out of sync with the foot, either way, one way or the other. And he knew which guys the following year to this guy is likely to be jumping up in ERA, this guy is likely to be dropping down. That's what it was designed for. And when it started to be overanalyzed, like you said, it wasn't good for, it implicitly doesn't acknowledge the fact that you can pitch to contact or something. And initially, there was the attitude was, oh no, this is true, there's no such thing as pitch contact. I think that's changed. I think they realize there are pitchers that, yes, be it your knuckleballers or that, it shows up who consistently, yes, you can get weaker contact. It took them a while to figure that out.
So, kind of to all of what we've said, there's a difference between some of these stats that are trying to measure skills, and then the stats that we're growing up with that are used to basically outcomes. Home runs and outcomes. FIP is an attempt to measure at least an aspect of skill.
Yeah.
How do you on the radio try to make that difference and explain it?
I don't know that you can. I mean, I think that there's guys who, I think it depends on your audience, okay? So if you're like Dan Bernstein and you already have a cultivated audience, you can yell at people and be like, you're too stupid to understand this, and this is what we're talking about, and if you don't get it, then change the channel. I do not have that audience yet. I hope to get that audience someday, but so I try to, I would probably say just that. You're talking about measuring raw skill. This is a measure of, what the person has already done. The Simpsons episode with Bill James.
Wait a minute, do you have a hitting metric that makes him look good last year?
No.
Okay.
But you know what I mean? The only measure these people use is batting average, and they just want to yell and yell and yell. And I mean, there's some people who won't even use splits, so they'll just scream at how Kyle Schwarber's only hitting, 178 or whatever. And you're like, but look at what he's done in July. Look what he's done post All-Star. I don't care about that. Like, well, you should. Because that's a more recent statistic. But
and he's young enough that it matters.
Yeah, so, I don't know. There's a lot of old people out there who just aren't going to change their ways.
How many people, one of my best friends is the guy who last year was at Soldier Field with the Cutler for MVP sign. How many of those guys are calling in versus they're more edgy? Because I feel like, of all my friends, some of them are really smart and come to the SABR things. but he's the only one who's going to call into the score and tell
Yeah.
you how.
There's probably much more of those people.
Yeah. And that's what I thought. And so a lot of times you get it, it's like, I wonder how much of the audience is actually.
Well, the text line is comprised of the worst people in the world, right?
Okay.
So I mean, the whole show is like, you know, go back in the kitchen, go make me a sandwich,
Yeah.
blah blah blah. You know, the good news is I have a lot of friends who are really smart and who are very educated in sabermetrics, and so they will call in and text in and, you know, give me tips and, you know, tell this guy this and, you know, stuff like that to try to help out. So luckily, coming from the baseball blogging community, so a lot of those guys now are, you know, Harry Polides was one of those guys and stuff. So, you know, I have all those friends from way back when. In fact, the guy who invented Tuplan is like a great friend of mine, which is the greatest statistic ever invented, by the way. Do you guys all know Tuplan now? It's famous. It's, you know, thrown out on the base path like a nincompoop. He invented it for Ryan Terrio back when he was first playing for the Cubs, and now it's like a thing. It's like people, I see people from like, you know, Dodgers broadcasters talking about it and stuff, so it's gone around the world. But I'm lucky to have those people that tune in and listen and will call in and we'll try to explain things to people and try to help out and stuff like that. But I think your usual score caller is probably the guy with the color for MVP. Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of the callers, like I know you've been, I hear your show on Saturdays at times. How, like, and you said, you know, being a woman is a different type of audience. Do you still have to screen calls? Is there any call screening? Yeah.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
So you're still doing a lot of that.
Yeah, I think, well, everybody has, you know, producers screen the calls for everybody.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, we still have guys. We had a guy last week who held for 29 minutes so that he could ask which one of us had bigger boobs.
No.
Like, there's still those guys out there, you know, and that sucks. But I mean, the best you can do is sort of make a joke out of it. I mean, I think of the women who went, you know, the women who had to fight to get into locker rooms, the women who went through much, much worse. Even women like Colleen Dominguez over at Fox FS1, where they did a whole meeting apparently on whether or not, how much weight she needed to lose and whether or not she should have plastic surgery, where they had a table of men sitting around basically judging her video of her, and you know, that is still happening in the industry. So I try to take it with a grain of salt. I mean, if someone's threatening to kill me, which has happened, that I take much more seriously. But a lot of it, that happens all the time to women in sports. Threats, rape threats, death threats, yeah.
You guys did that video.
Yeah, Sarah Spain and I did a video about it.
That's worth, anybody hasn't seen that, should watch that.
It happens a lot more than it should.
Yeah.
It will surprise you how much it happens.
Yeah, I mean, there's still. Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's called More Than Mean.
More Than Mean?
More Than
Okay.
Mean. But you know, and I think that men get it as well, obviously. But I think that for women, it tends to be much more gendered and much more sexualized. So guys might be like, "You're an idiot. You're stupid. You should. I hope you get fired." Whereas women's are like, you know, "I hope so. Or, I want to hit you. I want to kill you with a hockey puck and rape your dead corpse." That was one I actually got. So when it's someone who waits 29 minutes to ask who has bigger boobs, all you can do is kind of be like, you know, we just made fun of him for like an hour.
And you like form his number and like, okay, if this number ever calls back, we're not answering.
Well, we can block people on the text line, but we don't actually see their full numbers, although we tell them we do all the time, so then we can like try to, you know, terrify them that way. Yeah, scare them a little. But the text line is, I don't know, I used to text into the score all the time before I was working there. And I would actually text in sports things, but when you see what's actually coming in on the text line, it's kind of terrifying sometimes.
How many it's funny because I've heard you guys talk about this. How many texts do you get during an hour-long show?
Yeah, geez, how do you?
Oh God, hundreds. I mean,
I don't know. I'm a fuddy-duddy.
Yeah, it just runs. It depends. I mean, you know, you might get 4 for 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden you get 50 in the next 20. It just rolls.
Is it something that pops up on a computer screen?
There's so I've got like 3 computer screens. I've got callers. I've got whatever I'm working on the internet, and then we've got the text line.
Okay.
So
it's not like you. It's like
so you can just
cell
pick up.
phone here. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's times when we just don't look at it because we're just like, this is just getting. You know, the most disturbing thing is when people take the time to learn things about your personal life and then use that. So, for example, people know I always talk generally about where I live, and so people will say, you know, your kids go to this school and you probably went to this meeting where they were trying to keep black kids out of our school and stuff like that. And I'm like, my kids don't even go to that district. I don't know what you're talking about. But just the fact that the people invested that much time to try to figure out where my kids go to school so that they could send this text is, it's not right. I mean, clearly there's something wrong with you if that's how you're spending your time. But there's more people out there like that than you would think.
You see Baseball America's been doing, I've noticed it this year a lot more, that like the women in sports in Seattle had a game. It was like women's night.
Yeah.
And then it seems, do you think within the next 15 years there will be a female general manager?
I was going to throw that question out to you guys. A female GM?
There's a couple that are like close, but I don't know that they'll get over that.
Yeah, you know, I was, I guess Kim Ng is the one that we always thought was going to be the first female GM. Yeah, she gets interviewed all the time. She would be terrific. You know, I'm lucky enough to be friends with Amy Trask, who was close enough to being the first. I think if Al Davis hadn't died, she would have probably been the first female GM in professional sports. I don't know. I mean, there's still. I'm not around the front offices enough to know how progressive and enlightened their attitudes are. I know that in the industry and sports media in general, it is a lot of times like being in Anchorman. You know, it's still very male-dominated and very sort of frat housey across the board, I think, no matter where you work. I don't know. I got it. I would sure love to see it.
I think the answer is yes. And the reason I think that is because 15 years ago, we wouldn't have assumed John Daniels would be a
John Daniels, Andrew Friedman,
right,
Hahn,
exactly.
Epstein, and that's
I think once that wave has played, we've seen it, it's playing out now, we realize you don't have to be some former player to do this.
Well, Dave Stewart did a hell of a job on a few trades, so.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, he helped out teams, just not the D-backs.
Which I hate making fun of that because we need more diversity in this industry. And one thing that these Ivy League guys have done is make it way wider probably than it even was then. So that's an issue too.
I'll say this, in 2010, I started a sports network based sort of on the SB Nation model, and it was all women though writing about the teams. So I put out a call on Twitter, like if you're a woman and you want to run a blog about a sports team, like let me know. I got so many responses. I had to sit there and write them down so I didn't miss anybody. We launched, later that summer. I shut it down in 2013 because I'd actually moved into media, and because so many of the women that had worked for me had moved into media. So there's women at like Fox Soccer. There's a couple women who got into the Cubs at very low levels, doing sort of helping maintain their statistics database. By far, the most number of women I got were women who wanted to write about baseball and women who were very metrically inclined. So knowing that pool of women is out there, I really, really hope that someone comes out like that. I would love to see that.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, you had a show talking about Jessica Mendoza.
Mm-hmm.
What was the feedback after? Because I was lucky enough to be driving around listening to that. What was the feedback afterwards? I'm curious.
Yeah, that was when we had Doug Glanville on, who has been a friend of bloggers like from the beginning. Doug has always been great about that kind of stuff. He wrote a great piece for the New York Times about Jessica Mendoza and saying that he wished because every time she's on, right, you see all these tweets of guys like, oh, last thing I want to hear is a woman talking about baseball and stuff like that. And Doug said, I wish that all these guys could see how the players respond to Jessica because they treat her as an equal and as a fellow athlete because they know how good she was at her sport. And so, Doug came on and he talked about that, and there's always, I think the thing is, when you like something, you don't necessarily say, hey, I like that. But if you hate something, you're much more motivated to tell the people who did it that you hated it, right? So, I mean, the response was, I think, typical. It was, women shouldn't be talking about sports. Sports is where I go to get away from women. I have people say to me all the time, I see it on the text line or people tweet at me, the last thing I want to hear when I'm driving is sports from a woman. And I'm just like, I'm sorry that you have to listen to sports words coming out of my mouth. That must be traumatic for you. But the fact is, girls in my generation who grew up as daughters of Title IX, I sat on my dad's lap and watched football. I was the oldest child. My dad didn't hesitate to put me in sports. I played baseball, I didn't play softball, which is another thing that really bugs me, is women being shuffled off into softball who want to play baseball. And I was one of those girls. And I eventually wound up playing soccer and doing gymnastics and diving and volleyball because I wanted to play baseball and I couldn't. So I always wonder, the question I really think is in the next 15 years if we're going to see a woman in Major League Baseball. I think could probably happen. I think it probably would be a reliever. But, obviously, I wonder, yeah, go ahead.
No, left-handed?
Yeah, maybe. I wonder what happens if you take the best female athletes out there, the Jenny Finches and the Serena Williamses and all those women, and let them play baseball for 15 or 20 years and see what develops. That's really what I'm interested in. And there's a lot of girls right now playing travel baseball against boys' teams. Jessica Luther just did a great piece on a travel team that has girls from Massachusetts, Florida, Texas, LA, and they come together like twice a year to play tournaments. And they get killed because they never get to play together. But that sort of let girls play baseball movement is sort of growing, and I'd really like to see that.
There's I know there's just a women's baseball tournament up at in Rockford last month.
Yeah, it was. I don't know exactly when it was, but I remember seeing the. Yeah, I mean, to get enough girls playing baseball, and softball's great, and a lot of people love softball, but it's a different sport. And you know, there's a girl down the block from us who played baseball on my son's team. She was better than all the boys by a mile. And you know, eventually she was 11, and girls travel softball came calling, and she went and played softball. And I wonder what would have happened for her if the girls travel baseball had come calling, or if even boys travel baseball had come calling. You know, and it's sad to me to see those girls not get those opportunities.
Well, the biggest thing is just the physical differences as we beef everybody up. You know, how many ladies can be that strong to throw a pitch? You know,
yeah, but then you see,
85, 90
which is coming up later today, we constantly have to tell our producers, you've got 4 dudes here. Cancel some of them and go get us some women. And if you don't have any, we'll give you their names. Because, you know, this came up too with talking about the diversity of the Athletic launching. You know, the Athletic launched their All-American site, and they took a lot of heat on Twitter because it's called the All-American, and it was like 7 white people in a sport that is, what, I don't know, 60% African-American. So, one of the things I think about women is that we don't necessarily hear about job openings and stuff the way that a lot of my male colleagues do, just because we're not part of that network. You know, we're still trying to get our feet in. So, if you want to have diversity, you have to go out and court it, and you have to say, hey, you know, I've had people reach out to me and say, you know, we're hiring someone, we'd love to hire a woman, would you please apply for it? And I've had to do that. We've had to do that with our podcast. We've had episodes where we're like, we can't have 5 white girls sitting here talking about diversity. You know, we need to get someone else. So we reach out and, you know, like this week we're talking to Jamel Hill. We try to do stuff like that. And I think it's, you know, that's something that you have to sort of be conscious of. And so for me, a lot of it is, on Twitter, I'm going to follow 5 new people every week. And 3 of them are going to be women of color. Because I know that is an area that I was really lacking in my, you know, Twitter is your bubble. You create your own bubble, right? So who was coming in for me? It was mostly white people, and it was a lot of men. So I had to sort of consciously curate, bringing in women of color, bringing in people of color to get different points of view on things. And I think that's really important for us all to do. So that's what I always challenge people to do, is follow 5 new people a week and try to make at least 2 of them women of color. Make 3 of them women, 2 of them women of color. And I think that's how you sort of find a lot of that stuff. Thanks so much for having me here today, guys. It was great talking to you. Yeah.
Actually, I just wanted to say I really appreciated your legal insight on during the Patrick Kane rape thing.
Oh.
I know you got a lot of problems with that, but I really appreciated you talking about the legal aspect and all that sort of thing.
You know, that's the thing I always tell people who want to move into the industry, to figure out what your hook is. For me, it was being able to talk about legal things that other people couldn't talk about because they didn't know. Yeah, the frustration with stuff like that is a lot of times, I'm sure Gordon can relate, you know a lot of things you can't report. And so that was a kind of a tough time. And that's actually what led to the whole More Than Mean thing, was the blowback that Sarah and I both got after the Patrick Kane case. So yeah, but I appreciate you saying that. Thanks very much. Yeah.
For all of y'all, we had the people from the Rockford Peaches speak at SABR Day 2016. The video is up on the website, the chapter website.
That's terrific. I'm from the Rockford area, and let me tell you, the peaches still loom large, very large there.
Yeah. I mean, we had the guys who were rebuilding the park.
The park.
Spoke to us, and we had. I think we had a couple of people from the Rockford Starlights there.
Yeah. And there was one young girl who was a ball player.
Right. Well, there, and I know that video is up on the website.
Very cool. Thanks, you guys. I really appreciate coming to